Ladies and gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to speak here at the Mises Summer University, which is the great teaching event and learning event of the year. As one of, it's my definite Mises Institute favorite conference, and the Mises Institute makes my favorite conferences anyway, so it's the favorite of the favorite conferences, and which is due not only because I meet every year again my charming colleagues, but also meet lots of new people, new students, and I'm sure we will have a terrific week in the days to come. The Mises Summer University, for those of you who have taken a close look at our plan, has a stringent logical order. We'll start in the first 2 days with a short with a crash program in economic principles, and then turn, as from day 3, Wednesday, to more specialized subjects. When I speak a little bit slowly from time to time now, you've got to forgive me. Sometimes I'm translating again. Till last week or so I taught in French. Now I've got to switch to English again. As sometimes German is the language of love, of course. So that's easy. It always comes, but sometimes in economics it's a little more difficult. Okay, so we have a logical architecture of our classes, and so far you had lectures on the history of the Austrian school, and then also on value and price. And we now have to deal with the central subject of human action and of social organization, which is production, the problem of production. Therefore, the title of our lecture could also be the economics of production. The crucial fact that we encounter here is that human action takes place in a physical context and is therefore determined by natural laws. And it is the implications of these natural laws that we confront for social organization that will occupy us in my lecture. So we'll first talk about the definition of production, and then show how this definition will lead us naturally to the distinction between different orders of goods. Here I will repeat just a little bit what Professor Salerno talked to you about already this morning. And then we will come to speak about and present the law of returns, which is the central element of the economics of production, and then explain how the law of returns is used by the two basic mechanisms through which we can increase the productivity of human labor. And these two basic mechanisms, on the one hand, are savings and investments, and on the other hand, the division of labor. So, human cooperation. Let's start off then with the definition of production. Production is a conscious transformation of nature. So human beings intervene to give to nature a different shape than it would have had without their intervention. You go to your fridge, take out 4 eggs, and go to some other part of your kitchen and take a little flour and a few other items such as water or milk, and you transform this into a couple of pancakes. Okay, so that's a very primitive production process. Well, for some people like myself, naturally born with 2 left hands, can be complicated. But so what we have here is then a transformation of nature. We find that is from the point of view of the acting person concerned, what he finds are eggs, and what he finds is flour, and we don't raise the question, how did the flour come into existence? And he finds water, or he finds milk. And he puts these things together in a transformation process and creates something new. His physical environment is transformed, and so whereas before there were individual eggs and flours and so on, there are afterwards pancakes. Now, from a sheerly physical point of view, we could just say, well, okay, before there was one thing, thereafter there is another thing. It's completely senseless, if you wish. Cannot say much more about this from a physical point of view. From an economic point of view, from the point of view of acting human beings, we have here a meaningful process. The reason why these ingredients were transformed into pancakes was because the acting person desired to have pancakes. That is, for him, the result, pancakes on his platter, is more important than the elements that existed before. So we have here a value relationship between the product and the factors of production. The product is desired because it has, from the point of view of the acting person, a higher value than the factors of production that existed before. Now, it's important to emphasize that this holds true from the point of view of the acting person under consideration. It holds not necessarily true for all of mankind. For example, consider that you enter the kitchen of your mother and you transform you make pancakes. Then the mother comes and says, "Oh, what did you do to my eggs? What did you do to my nice flour? You had perfectly good eggs and perfectly good flour, and you turned it into this crap." She planned to do some other dish, or bake a cake, or what's on and so on. For her, the result of your efforts has less value than the ingredients that existed before. It's also, by the way, a standard Austrian criticism of central banking. And we always say, Mises said, well, central banks do take perfectly good ink and perfectly good paper. So, production is therefore a transformation of nature, and the new state of affairs has a higher value than the previous state of affairs. That is production, conscious transformation of nature. Now, production is therefore always a process extended in time, and we can illustrate this with a very simple diagram with an arrow. As a shaker, it's not a serpent or a snake or so. It is an arrow. I'm still weakened with from my lunch discussion, which was accidentally related to the subject of our lecture. So we have here, this arrow represents the passage of time. This is the sooner point of time, t0, and this is the later point of time, t1. And so in each production process, we can therefore distinguish a beginning, in which we use the factors of production, then it stretches out in time and ends in T1. We have the product. So here we have factors of production. And in the meantime, we have here in this phase between T0 and T1, we have human labor. Attention, I spell labor correctly. And here we have product. Okay. Now, this is a very simple production process here because we suppose that the factors of production are readily available. What we find in most cases, and here is of course where things get more interesting also, what we find in most empirical cases is that we can produce the factors of production themselves. Right? So for example, the question is again, how did the eggs end up in my fridge? Well, one answer would be, well, it's a fiery girl that comes along each night and drops the eggs in my or we have a magician in the family and says 1, 2, 3 egg, and so on. So that's one. And of course, the standard explanation is much more banal, right? We have somebody keeping hens, and the hens drop the eggs, and he picks up the eggs and puts them into boxes and sells them, and so on, right? So, and then finally, people are transporting somebody, your wife or your son, your grandsons, right? They're transporting this into your fridge. So we have different points of time here. Oh, this is T3 and this would be T4. And at the end of each production process, we always have a product, so this doesn't change. And now what I do now is not very complex, it's just a terminological clarification. Again, I repeat just what Professor Salerno told you this morning. What we have here is a factor of production. Factor of production, let's say it's factor of production 1, which is transformed into the product through, well, human labor from T3 to T4. Then the question is, the factor of production 1 could, for example, be eggs in the box or eggs in the supermarket. So somebody bought it and brought it to your fridge. And the question is, how did this factor of production come into being itself? So there's another factor of production or other factors of production, 2, removed in time before this, and so on. Here again, factor of production 3 and factor of production 4. So we have here a time structure of production, and this time structure is a characteristic feature of any type of production process. First need to transform very primitive materials, for example, minerals and other resources that we find in nature. They are transformed in more elaborate factor of production, for example, in steel bars or something, right? You take minerals, steel, iron ore that you find in nature and you transform it into steel. And the steel then you transform into a hood of a car, and the hood of the car is then transformed into a lorry, right? With other pieces, and with the help of this lorry you can perform transport services and then get eggs into your fridge and so on. So we always have this time structure of production, and an order of goods. We talk here in the case of the product, we call this the good of a first order, or first order good. That is the terminology used by Karl Menger. The factor of production 1 would be a higher order good of the first order, higher order good, an even higher order good, another higher order good, and another higher order good of increasingly higher orders. So the higher the order of a good, the more removed it is from the final product. Now, based on this simple distinction, we'll take this up later on, we can now turn to the central law of the economics of production, which is the law of returns. And as I mentioned in my introduction, what we here have is a law of nature. It concerns the relationship between a factor of production that economists typically abbreviate with the letter X and the amount of product produced with the help of this factor of production product, and we usually denominate it by the letter Q, so the quantity of product. So, for example, let's say you run a coffee shop, and your product would be numbers of coffees served in your shop. Then you have various factors of production. You have, for example, X would be the number of workers, number of waiters. Y would be the number of tables. Z might be the surface, Z1 the surface of your shop, and Z2, Z3 and so on would be other factors relating, for example, to location. Right? The 3 secrets of real estate management, of retail management, location, location, and location. So this, for example, as I always say, well, if you have a nicely located coffee shop downtown Auburn, you would have greater success in selling coffees than if you go 5 miles out of Auburn and might sell it to the sheep or to somebody else. So we have various factors of production, and what we now do is to examine the impact of the variation of one factor on the product given all other factors. That is, X is now a variable, and the other factors of production, Y, Z, Z1, Z2, etc., are kept constant. Now we ask, so if we hire one additional waiter, and let's say we are in an initial situation, we are here, and we hire one additional waiter, then of course this person might help us to serve more coffees. So we would get from this point to this point, right? We had before maybe 2 waiters, and now we have hired an additional waiter. We get to this point. And then we hire a 4th waiter, we get to this point, and a 5th waiter, we get to this point. And then we observe something interesting, namely with the 6th waiter or so, and this is obviously just an example, numerical example that I make up, the numbers of coffees served will decrease. Why might this be? Well, it might be, for example, that your shop is very small and the guys are standing each other on the feet. Okay, so the additional 6th person does not produce any additional number of coffees served, but actually prevents certain coffees to be served that otherwise would have been served, right? And the same holds true for the other things too. I mean, if you have just 1 table or 2 tables in your coffee shop, right, then creating an increasing number of waiters swirling around will not improve the product. So what creates this problem here, what we can call a bottleneck of production, that production is limited to some extent. There's a maximum of product that I can obtain by the variation of my factor x. This results from the fact that the other factors of production are limited. In other words, the reason why I cannot go beyond a certain point, beyond a certain quantity of product with varying my factor x, results from the fact that the other factors are limited and therefore provide only limited services. It's because the number of tables is limited, and at 2 tables, for example, only, 10 people can sit. So you cannot serve more coffees than that. Or the service is limited, so you cannot have more coffee served on that surface, and so on. So the limitation results from the fact that the number of the other factors is limited. Now, we therefore have typically this form. We can now connect all these dots and arrive at this curve, which has this characteristic shape and is representative of the law of returns. Okay? The law of return says that by varying any factor of production x, I can increase my product up to a certain point, after which I will decrease the quantity of product. Otherwise said, for each factor of production there is an optimal amount given the amounts of all other factors used. Now, what would happen if I increase now one of the other factors of production? Let's suppose, for example, I increase the number of tables, let's say from 2 to 3. So this is no longer constant, but y increases. What will be the consequence? The consequence for our curve here relating the relationship between x and the product will be that the curve moves up somewhere here. So this was the curve that existed with y1, and this was the curve that now exists with y2. Why is it that the curve moves up? Well, we can understand the common sense reason. Well, because we have one additional table, therefore for any number of waiters, well, the numbers of coffees served will increase. And now with 6 servers, we might actually still increase the number of coffees. Our new maximum might be here with 6, whereas was before with 5, and so on. Now this means that I can increase the productivity of human labor by increasing the quantities of the other factors of production used. And of course, we as human beings have a bias toward our own productivity because that's what we are living off. And the more things we produce per hour of labor, the more things we can also consume. Therefore, we are of course particularly interested in moving up this curve representing the limitations of our product. And so the more other factors we use, well, the more productive we are. That's, of course, an idea that is familiar to everybody. The more tools we can use, the more productive is human labor. Now, the question is then, what does this process imply? As I will show to you in a minute, what it implies is that there is now a trade-off. We can either produce more consumer goods directly, more coffee served right now, or we can take some time off, withdraw some labor from producing coffees, and produce, for example, a few more tables, thereby later on increasing the number of coffees served, that is the number of the quantity of our product. And this is precisely the product of saving and investment that I mentioned. Before I get to this, let me introduce one additional element that we need, namely the production possibilities frontiers. So we have said that every production process is subject to the law of returns. Every production process, therefore, has this characteristic shape. For example, here we would have the production of guns, and here we have hours worked, so human labor. And here we would have similarly, for a completely different product, let's say trousers, we have exactly the same curve, right? We have somewhere a maximum, and here also hours worked. Now, because these two production processes use the same factor, namely human labor, they are interconnected. We can express this interconnectedness through a curve that is called the production possibilities frontier. Now we can derive this curve in the following way graphically. We can say here we have here guns, and here we have trousers. Hours worked on trousers, and here we have hours worked on guns. So in this quadrant, we insert a production, our curve representing the law of returns. We will look, for example, this way, and here we have exactly the same curve. All right, so what I did here is simply to transfer this curve into this diagram here in this quadrant, and this curve is transferred here. Right, all I do is to turn this 90 degrees and then plug it in here. Now, on top of this, my two production processes are connected. So we have here a budget constraint in terms of time. Let's say we have a 10-hour working day, so 10 hours here too. And I can spend 10 hours making trousers. If I do this, then I will get the following number of trousers produced. Here, this. Tuck, 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 tuck. Here. On the other hand, I could spend 10 hours making guns only, so I produce no trousers. I'm here. So I'm at this point. Or I might choose to produce a combination of guns and trousers. For example, I might spend 5 hours making guns and 5 hours making trousers. which would give me a different combination, namely this one. So I get to this point. And then, of course, for any intermediate combination, such as this, and so on. Now I can do again the same thing. I connect all these points, so this point, this point, this point, this point, and all intermediate points, and I get something like this curve. Okay, and this red curve is called the production possibilities frontier. PPF. What the PPF tells us, or what it illustrates more precisely, what it illustrates is that there is a choice to be made between any two products that we desire. Because of the limitations of our own productiveness, we can either produce more guns or more trousers. Whatever we do, there is a price to be paid. There is an opportunity cost to our choice. So let's say if we produce, for example, initially, well, I make a new diagram. So here we have our PPF. Let's say initially I picked this combination here. What the curve tells me, I can, in the best of all cases, pick any combination on this line. So I can produce this amount of guns and this amount of trousers. But I cannot go beyond this curve because of physical limitations. I have only so and so many hours that I can work. Therefore, this is the maximum amount of goods that I can produce in this combination. I can pick a point inside this curve, for example, this point here. I can produce less hours, less guns and less trousers, but working less efficiently or sleeping a little bit, chatting with my coworker, and watching the news and various other things. But I cannot go beyond this point. What I can do then is to pick a point. I have therefore an interest in picking a point on the line. And the point I pick will depend on my personal preferences. Some people are gun nuts. They will be here. Other people are peaceniks. They are here. Okay? Now let's suppose I want to get, for example, from this point here, I'm a converted gun nut. Before I was a nut. And now, under the influence of my new girlfriend, I convert to better ways and I abandon the guns, at least partially. So I give up my machine gun, but I still keep the shotgun and various other items. Right? And therefore I buy more trousers. Right? Before I was really running around in my rags. And now for the first time I own a decent trouser. It's not just my underwear, but trouser actually. So I get an additional quantity of trousers, so we make a great move on this side, but it comes at the expense of reduced gun production, gun consumption. So we have here a reduction here. So this increase in the production of trousers, I spent more time making trousers, comes at the expense of a reduced production of guns. And this reduction, ladies and gentlemen, is then the opportunity cost, okay, of the increased production of trousers. It would be the other way around, and we use the same basic mechanism. It's just a different perspective. In the case of a woman, let's say Mary, who under the impact of her new boyfriend comes to have more sound views on guns. So she reduces her trouser production and spends more time cleaning the machine gun. So the increased gun production comes at the expense of reduced trouser production. And again, so it's the opportunity cost of the increased production that takes place elsewhere. Now I've taken these two examples just because it's a little bit funny, and of course it holds true for any two goods. Right? Production of whatever, liquor, and production of microphones, production of carpets and of lamps, any two goods are subject to this relationship. There's a trade-off to be made between any two goods, and they are connected through this production possibilities frontier. It connects, therefore, all production processes. So, the question then is, how do we advance civilization? What does advance in civilization mean from a material economic point of view? Well, it means that we can consume greater quantities of goods and services. Greater quantities does not necessarily mean, well, more guns, but can also mean guns of a better quality. Does not necessarily mean spend longer vacations, but vacations in a better environment, environmentally more safe or clean and so on, surrounded by nice people, not your usual neighbors and so on. So improvements of all kinds are therefore subject to this production, and what production invariably involves is an increase, a shift of the PPF. So let's say we have here two goods, Q1 and Q2, so any two goods. And what economic growth therefore implies is an outward shift of the PPF in this form. Does not need to be a proportional shift as in my diagram here. It can be also something like this. For example, like this, also be economic growth, right? Shift of this type. But to facilitate exposition, we take this. And of course, the opposite, a shrinking economy, a process of decivilization, involves a reduction of the PPF to a narrow level, to a more narrow level. So we always have a limitation on our productive abilities, but this limitation can be more or less big. And what a process of civilization consists on is to enable us to produce more and more goods, and therefore we have an extension, outward extension of the PPF. Now, how does this come about? And here we have then two basic mechanisms that I announced in my introduction. On the one hand, savings and investment, and on the other hand, the division of labor. So let's take them up, discuss them in turn. Let's return to our diagram representing the time structure of production. Oh no, that's not a good start. That's a good start. Okay, so we have our production here. Let's say in the first case we have a very primitive form of production. We transform one factor of production, one element of nature, working with other elements that are spontaneously exist. For example, you want to run a skiing slope, right? So what you do then is to set up some mechanism for tourists to get up the hill, right? So you have a lift, you construe a lift, and at the end of this production process, you can sell a product which is downhill runs for tourists and so on. Now what you do in this case is that you work with all other factors as they exist in nature. For example, the steepness of the hill is as it is in nature. The amount of snow on your slope is as it is in nature. But of course, in production, we are not limited to this. We can try to modify our environment as to suit our objectives. So what we could do in a second step then is to buy a snow cannon and arrange or be prepared to always cover our slope with a sufficient amount of snow for the tourists to glide down, even if it's 75 degrees outward. Right? So what we do in this case is we lengthen the structure of production, we add this additional element, and we therefore make our production process more lengthy, or, in other words, more roundabout. So roundabout production is the technical term. More roundabout production takes place here. So we go, so to say, backward, extend our structure of production in order to be prepared for the next production process. And the overall result is an increase of the product. In this case, the product would be numbers of hours skied on our slope. And the same thing holds, of course, true for any other production process. There's always a possibility to improve the result, the product, by adding additional production steps before the final production step. So always we can increase the physical product that we have by a more roundabout production. Now what roundabout production implies and why it's important from economic point of view is that it raises the necessity of savings. Because production is extended in time, it raises the problem of, consumption during production. We cannot engage in a production process that we cannot physically survive. Right? So you set out to work on a pyramid and your fridge is not full and there's no food production going on. You will die very soon before even the first layer of your pyramid is laid. So in order to survive the production process, we need to consume. Production needs consumption, otherwise said, the human economy operates under the constraint of the stomach. Okay, that's what economists say, the constraint of the stomach. And this constraint operates on a very elementary level. We cannot even survive the production process if we do not have enough food in our stomach. But it concerns all other consumer goods that we would like to consume and which for us are more important than the additional product that will result from our production process. So we need to be well enough equipped with all these other things before we can engage in something that is called roundabout production. If production becomes more roundabout, it is clear that we need to be equipped even more to survive an even longer production process. And this fund of consumer goods out of which we satisfy our needs during the production process, this is savings. Okay? It's the amount of consumer goods not consumed that have resulted from previous production processes. So greater roundaboutness implies always a greater need for additional savings. And that's, of course, a point that has been realized implicitly by the classical economists, but stressed in particular by the Austrian economists as from boehm-bawerk. And boehm-bawerk hammered this point. You can survive longer production processes are interesting because they allow us to be more productive, but there's a price to be paid. We need to save more in order to be equipped during this longer production process. Saving more means, of course, cutting down on present consumption. So the opportunity cost of a greater affluence of consumer goods in the future is a reduction of consumption, therefore a reduction of satisfaction in the present. Because production is now longer, right, we have this increase of the productivity of human labor, X and Q, right? I just repeat the diagram that I pinned down before, right? We have this increase, this shift of our product curve. Right? So the law of returns limits our product for any amount of hours worked. And what happens now through more roundabout production, because we first produce an additional other factor of production, our productivity of human labor shifts upward. So this implies that increased savings enable us precisely to do what we described before, namely to shift the PPF outward. Right. Now for any two goods, savings can be used either for a more roundabout production of Q1 or for a more roundabout production of Q2 or for more roundabout production of both of them. Greater savings push the production the PPF, the production possibilities frontier, outward. Let us again consider this from even another point of view, namely by taking into consideration now consumption in the present and consumption in the future. It's another trade-off. Consumption, present consumption, and here we have future consumption. Let's say we currently use we have chosen this combination. So we do not consume all of our ongoing income. We save a part of it. So one part is consumed in the future, another part is consumed in the present. And at this point, the ongoing savings that we make are just sufficient to replace the capital equipment that we have created in the past. That is, the additional factors of production created in the past. In our example that I used before, right, I used the additional factor of production was the snow cannon. In this case here, the additional savings are just enough to replace the snow cannon on a constant basis. Now, what happens if I reduce my present consumption? In this case, I can save more, and as a consequence, my PPF will shift outward. Okay. And if I do this even more, so I could now consume this amount of goods. And if I now again reduce my consumption a little bit, let's say to this point, I could increase my PPF even more, and so on. And so we get a growth process fueled by increased by reduced present consumption. And of course, the opposite will hold true if I if I increased my present consumption. If I went to this point, let's say to this point here, then my PPF would start to shrink. So savings and investment are therefore the first basic mechanism through which we can increase the productivity of human labor and therefore the living standards of the population. Now, to make matters short, the question then is, to anticipate on something that will be discussed in more detail later on, the question then is, under which conditions does such saving take place? And here, one factor is of paramount importance, that is security of property rights. And we see from our diagram here, roundabout production making production ever more fruitful. Right? We can play this game again and again. Right? We can extend ever more backward, and therefore ever more increase the physical productivity of labor, making us ever more rich. But of course, we will do this only if we can reasonably expect to reap the fruits of this effort. Right? If we cut down on our present consumption now and want to increase our future consumption, we reasonably expect that this will happen. We might do it. But if we have reasons to expect that this will not happen because, for example, the government takes us away our savings, or because the government confiscates the firms and the industrial equipment that we have set up, and there's less incentive to do this. And here we have the main reason why in certain countries of the world, the most interventionist governments, in particular in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, we have typically primitive production structures not extending, from hand-to-mouth production or maybe one interior production process, whereas in advanced industrial nations we have very lengthy production structures. And the reason why we have very lengthy production structures in the West is because it is actually worth a while. You see the result, you reap yourself the result, the benefits of your savings. And in these other countries, in Africa and elsewhere, it does not happen because people do not even go this far. They do not engage in roundabout production because they fear being expropriated or otherwise being hindered by government interventionism. Now let's turn to the second basic mechanism through which we can increase human productivity, and that is the division of labor. The division of labor is most obvious in the case in which we have different specializations, in which one person is good in the production of one good and another person is good in the production of another good. Right? Let's say, for example, we have here Paul and Mary. And to simplify things, we say that Paul and Mary both like to consume the same two goods. For example, rabbits and berries. I always take the same example. Rabbits. I like rabbits and berries. Rabbits shouldn't be overcooked, but you know. So, and Paul, let's say Paul is a very lousy hunter. He makes so much noise, and the rabbits run away before he even shows up. So let's say in 5 hours that he dedicates to rabbit hunting, he hunts just 2 rabbits, whereas Mary hunts down let's say 5 rabbits. And in 5 hours berry picking, Paul, on the other hand, because he's much taller, he gets to the points that Mary cannot reach without any additional instruments, which she does not have. So he can pluck, let's say, 1,000 berries, whereas Mary can only pluck 800 berries. So here the case is quite clear. The two can cooperate, that is, coordinate their production efforts. And Paul, for example, could specialize entirely on berry plucking. He would therefore invest now 10 hours in berries and pluck 2,000 berries in 10 hours. And Mary would entirely specialize on rabbit hunting, and she would therefore hunt 10 rabbits in 10 hours. And then, of course, we can compare the aggregate result of our little economy consisting of 2 persons, and we have here 7 rabbits and 1,800 berries, and here we have 10 rabbits and 2,000 berries. So, case is obvious, and that's actually what everybody thinks of when we talk about the division of labor, and it covers many cases. And what we see here is that human beings profit for the division of labor from being unequal. If they were perfectly equal in all respects, if they were, for example, perfect clones, they could not benefit from a division of labor. If Paul's productivity in all respects were exactly the same as the one of Mary, it wouldn't be worthwhile for them to share work, coordinate their efforts, and specialize in things. So it's only because human beings are unequal, unfortunately so, we have different sexes, we have different races, we have different geographical locations and so on, we have different age groups. therefore, people are drawn together through the division of labor. They have a material incentive in arranging themselves with their fellow human beings, stopping to knock them over with sticks and other things, stop making war, and from time to time just keep peaceful relations and profit from it, very materially. So what this means is then that economic analysis shows us that even if there were no other incentive for people to get together, they have not yet read Rousseau, and they have not yet read Jean-Paul Sartre, and various other important writers, that tell them how important it is to hold hands and sing songs and so on. And I don't deny that that's important, but so sometimes you don't like people, you can't smell them and can't stand their look and so on. What economic analysis tells us that even in such cases, people have a personal incentive to keep it cool, right, and play it safe and cooperate rather than hit one another with a stick. Now, the most fascinating aspect comes now, most fascinating chapter of this, is that the same story also holds true if we consider a case in which we have a superman and an underling. So, let's say now that Paul is the superman, and Paul in 5 hours he can chase 10 rabbits and pluck 1,000 berries. Whereas Mary is the underling. Okay? So, of course, just a female, so. I knew you would like it. And what else would it? 250. Yes. Yeah, welcome to politically incorrect jokes, series number 251. So Paul chases 210 rabbits in 5 hours and plucks 1,000 berries, and Mary chases 5 rabbits, so half of this, and 250 berries. Now we see, so Paul is superior to Mary in all respects. Okay. So what I tell to my students, if they find this example too banal, so I always think, well, that's the case of the Chinese economy. Paul is Chinese, and we are Marie. So, well, what is going to happen is this monster Paul, and he will just erase us, and nothing will be left of this. How could a division of labor take place between such unequal persons, right? And in fact, in former times, before the economists of the 18th and 19th century popped up the scene, this consideration was often used to justify authoritarian forms of government, because people say, well, you have the superior human beings here on the one hand, and okay, if they cooperate with the other ones, it's just because they render a favor, because they don't need the other guys really. So the least thing they can expect in return is that these here obey. Okay, shut up and do what I tell you. Now, what economic analysis shows us then is that that's not true, but that a division of labor profitable to both parties is possible even in this case, and always possible in this case. So let's take the following example. What we see here is that Mary, although being inferior in all respects to Paul, is less inferior in rabbit hunting than in berry plucking. So Mary might choose to specialize entirely on rabbit hunting and will, for example, chase down 10 rabbits in 10 hours. Whereas Paul will rearrange his production schedule to coordinate himself with Mary, and therefore he will spend less time on chasing rabbits. He will, for example, just spend 3 hours on rabbit hunting and chase 6 rabbits. And on the other hand, he will spend 7 hours plucking berries, which would give him 1,400 berries. So the aggregate result, if we compare it again. We have here 15 rabbits and 1,250 berries. And in this second case, after the division of labor, we have 16 rabbits and 1,400 berries. So a net increase in the production of both products. Oh, sorry. Like this? Huh? Now again, ladies and gentlemen, this holds true for any two goods and any initial combination of the two goods. The only condition that is necessary for a division of labor to set in, a fruitful division of labor, is that Mary is unequally inferior in the production. If she was as relatively as bad in chasing rabbits as she was in plucking berries, there would still no division of labor be possible between the two. But because she is unequally inferior, right, there is this division of labor possible between the two of them. Therefore, there is hope for France. Okay? There is hope for the West. It is natural that the Chinese today, which an economy which holds whatever, 1/3 or 1/4 of the world population, produces at least 1/3 or 1/4 of all refrigerators in the world. And if they produce today about 75 or 80% of all refrigerators in the world, as they do, well, that's only the natural result of specialization. We no longer produce refrigerators, just as Mary, in our example here, no longer produces berries. See, she specializes on something she does relatively best. And so we specialize and should look to specialize in those things that we do relatively best, because even the Chinese cannot do everything, okay? Even for the Chinese, the day has just 24 hours, okay? So the basic problem of human cooperation can therefore be illustrated here. It consists always in finding forms of cooperation, right, divisions of labor, that will benefit both parties. And the identification of such most suitable forms of cooperation in a market economy occurs in a system that is geared by market prices. It's market prices that gives us an indicator about which production processes are relatively most profitable for us in present circumstances. This is something about which we'll talk more in the following lectures over the week. So I conclude. As far as the economics of production is concerned, we have here the central element of economic analysis or the fundamental element of the economic analysis of a market economy. Production being a conscious transformation of nature in order to increase subjective value. Production is always being constrained by the law of returns, which implies a maximum amount of goods that can be produced with the help of a factor of production given the other factors of production. This also concerns human labor. Human labor is also constrained by the law of returns. And in order to increase the productivity of human labor, there are mainly two strategies to go about it. One is to increase the length of production processes, to increase greater roundaboutness of production, which implies greater savings, therefore comes at an opportunity cost in the form of reduced consumption in the present in order to be able to enjoy greater consumption in the future. And the second strategy to increase human productivity is through the division of labor. And the division of labor does precisely this. Right? It also shifts our PPF outward from this black curve, which exists before the division of labor sets in, to this curve, which comes into play once the division of labor exists. Thank you very much for your attention.